The adult human brain weighs approximately 1.5 kilograms, making up less than 2% of a person's body weight. And yet, the cerebellum is connected with the entire central nervous system through millions of connections. It defines our humanity and makes us the individuals that we are. The brain is responsible for the generation of language and thought, attention, consciousness, memory. The visual system is specialized to take visual information, essentially photons, and compose them into a coherent picture of our world. The visual pathway begins, of course, in the eye. It receives information about our muscle and joint position, or proprioceptive information, balance or vestibular information, as well as vast connections to and from the cerebral cortex. This makes the cerebellum the coordinator, and it influences all of our cortical functioning and output, and has a particular influence on motor functions that we will focus on here. This system will need precise information about the position of our limbs so that movements can be coordinated and initiated from the correct starting point. In this system, ongoing movement patterns are coordinated, and error detection systems allow for the immediate correction of the movement. Predictor of cortical output, and it is responsible for sort of quality control and constant error correction. We'll start with an anatomical overview and then take a closer look at each one of these systems. And imagination. In order to fit into the skull and accommodate the massive number of neurons and connections needed, the brain is highly full. Tentorium cerebelli, a dural reflection, isolates it in the posterior cranial fossa. It is connected to the brainstem through 3 cerebellar peduncles. This little bit of cerebellum here is the flocculus. It is connected to the nodule. Here, the cerebellum is detached from the brainstem. This is the anterior surface with the cerebellar peduncles that connect it to the brainstem. The flocculonodular lobe is responsible for balance. This is the posterior surface. In the midline, you can see the vermis, here, and inferior cerebellar peduncle. And together they form the flocculonodular lobe. It influences all of our cortical functioning and output, and has a particular influence on motor functions that we will focus on here. The creation of gyri or ridges and sulci or furrows. If we were to unfold the entire human brain, it would take up approximately 1 square meter. And this is the inferior surface. It influences all of our cortical functioning and output, and has a particular influence on motor functions that we will focus on here. The cerebellum is connected with the entire central nervous system through millions of connections. It influences all of our cortical functioning and output, and has a particular influence on motor functions that we will focus on here. Deep in the forebrain sit a group of nuclei that integrate all cortical activity into one behavioral output. These are the basal ganglia. These deep nuclei are interconnected with each other and with all areas of the CNS. A series of parallel circuits regulates different aspects of behavior. One circuit is primarily involved in the integration of motor output. This makes the cerebellum the coordinator and predictor of cortical output, and it is responsible for sort of quality control and constant error correction. We'll start with an anatomical overview and then take a closer look at each one of these systems. Another circuit plays a major role in learning and cognition. And finally, a third circuit regulates emotional aspects of behavior. So what does this mean? You can tell when someone's having a good day or a bad day by their posture, body language, and even their tone of voice. The largest part of the cerebellum has reciprocal connections with the cerebral cortex. From a motor perspective, it is here that fine coordination of complex movement patterns is coordinated. The goal of all our movements is that they be fluid, efficient, and target-oriented. From there, projections go to the lower motor neuron system in the spinal cord to ensure truncal stability. The next system to develop in the cerebellar circuitry is involved in the coordination of gait and limb movement. In order to achieve this, motor, association, and sensory cortices send their input to the basal ganglia, essentially asking them to make a decision of whether or not to execute this movement and then streamline the plan to do so. While one pathway will facilitate goal-oriented movements, another one will suppress all competing movement. This results in motor output that is sleek and appears effortless. This motor loop is active primarily when a task has been well learned. Together with association areas of the cortex, it helps to put together a routine for established motor output. This is the circuit that is active in these dancers now as they perform a well-rehearsed fluid routine. Here the information is processed. All movements that are part of the integrated plan are facilitated through it receives information about our muscle and joint position, or proprioceptive information, balance or vestibular information, as well as vast connections to and from the cerebral cortex.